It's coming. Prepare yourself. For Cube. Cube.
Ultracube is one of the most unique overhauls I've come across. Whereas normal Factorio doesn't have a cube, Ultracube rectifies this by containing a cube. Emphasis on a cube because we only get one. But what depraved depths of mammon and greed could compel a man to wish for a second cube? No, the cube is all we need. We love the cube, and in return for our love, the cube grants us many things. Yes, in order to create anything, we'll need the cube's help. Carrying the cube around with us makes us incredibly slow, but we can use it to manually extract endless amounts of matter. Just this is all that we'll need to craft things like power poles and belts, but this is an automation game, so wouldn't it be nice if we could make something else extract it for us? Now I know that it's difficult to let go of the cube, but with this synthesizer we can automate the process. Only problem, it takes 50 megawatts to run. That's a little above our current output of 0, so we're gonna need to figure out power first. Turns out, despite having access to an ultra-dense hypercube that contains limitless energy, we're just going to use it to boil water. It always comes down to boiling water. We can collect the steam in some tanks, but after making 1 gigajoules worth, the cube is spent. But don't worry, all we need to do is manually reboot it, and it's good as new. Now we can feed some basic steam engines and use that to power the synthesizer. It's only a little underpowered, and with a 50 megawatt operating cost and only 2.4 megawatts of supply, it'll take about 20 seconds to make anything. It's a bit of a waste to make matter since I can do that by hand, but what I can't make by hand are the tech cards I'll need to actually research things. Right now it's still up to me to manually move the cube from the output to the input, but hopefully we'll be able to change all that with this research. Inserters. Now you may have noticed that everything is being powered by some boiled cube water I made 5 minutes ago, and welcome to the main challenge of this run. Very little can be done without the cube, and if we're using it to make matter, then we're not using it to make steam for power. There are these emergency turbines that output like 120 kilowatts, but they can only power things directly around them, and it would take about 8 minutes to complete one cycle on the synthesizers, so they're mostly useless. Now, the first data cards took nothing but the cube to make, but unfortunately it's going to become a bit more complicated from here on out. I'm actually going to need to make some mining drills, but compared to vanilla, these mine ore 8 times faster, so we won't need many. Things like yellow belts, yellow inserters, and wooden power poles are completely absent from this mod, which is nice because that logistical challenge isn't the main challenge anymore. Time to fill up the steam tanks again. I'm sure there's got to be a better way, but before we can get to that, I've got to make some refined metals first. And don't worry, we'll need the cube for that as well. This ultra-dense furnace is too powerful to be fueled by anything but the cube, but the good news is, using it doesn't strain my power grid like the synthesizer, since it's burning all of its energy. It spits out another dormant cube, and rebooting this thing manually is a major pain. But fortunately, there's this recovery bay that I can research that'll reactivate it for me. I've just got to get the ingredients first. And there's really no reason why I shouldn't add on enough steam engines to fully power the synthesizer. It's not like it'll make me lose steam any faster. The most basic science is pretty easy to automate by just pulling it directly out of the synthesizer and into some labs, but we won't be able to do that for much longer. The good news is, we've researched the recovery bay. I'll just need to use the cube and some metals to make some of these, n-dimensional widgets. With this, I'll be able to just throw the cube into the boiler and watch as it continually recharges itself. The cube itself is said to be worth 1 gigajoule of power, but according to my calculations, it creates 1.04 gigajoules worth of steam. The recovery bay has an energy cost of 25 megawatts and takes 2 seconds to recover the cube, so that's 50 megajoules total, meaning we'll effectively get 0.99 gigajoules every cycle. That's enough to power a synthesizer for 20 seconds. Yeah, so it seems that the cube will be making many trips to the boiler, but that's why we're gonna store a bunch of steam inside these tanks. And I'll add on even more engines, because why not? And after inspecting the boilers more closely, it's actually capable of consuming 13,000 water a second, so it can be sped up considerably with faster water input. I'll add some more pumps and worry about that later. Right now I'm mostly concerned with getting the basics up and running, and I've just recently unlocked the ability to make my own synthesizers, which means I'll be able to graduate from this starter base. I've researched everything I can get with the basic cards, and this thing definitely isn't set up to make anything else, so time to rip it all apart. Thankfully, this mod starts out with a personal roboport and 5 construction bots. I'm also setting up some basic supplies automation down here. It's all hand-fed, but it's better than nothing. And when you're still learning a challenging mod like this, having something simple to focus on is nice sometimes. But I can't run away forever. It's time to make the green cards. They're quite simple in concept, just electronic circuits and widgets. But up until now, I've just been moving the cube by hand. Now I actually want to automate it. One thing that's important to note is that if you want to take anything out of a machine, we'll need to use filter inserters to make sure that they won't accidentally grab the cube and throw it onto the belt. Just like the steam, we'll also want to include some sort of buffer to store resources. Seeing as everything needs to share the cube, ideally we should keep enough in storage so that everything can run continuously until the cube gets back through the whole cycle. While we don't need the cube to make the actual circuits or data cards, it is required to make all the raw ingredients. It doesn't take too long to set up some spaghetti that'll work in theory, but automating the actual cube is the complicated part. In order to make sure that everyone gets their own playtime with the cube, we'll need to set up some circuit conditions. Those buffer chests can pull double duty here, because we can simply tell an inserter to grab the cube when they're getting low, and let go of the cube when it's over a certain limit. For the widgets and metals, it needs to recharge the cube between every cycle, while the matter and basic cards just need to reinsert the cube. I'll also add some circuits that reads our steam levels and grabs the cube if we're below a certain limit. We don't want to fill the steam tanks completely either, because otherwise the cube will get forever stuck inside the boiler, and needless to say, the cube's time is valuable. But now to insert the cube and get this process rolling. I'm realizing that this mod doesn't let things insert raw ingredients while there's still items in the output. It's probably so that it won't kidnap the cube and hold onto it forever, but it means it takes much longer for these crappy inserters to put in the 500 raw ores required. Taking items out takes quite some time as well. Using only 4 inserters was perhaps a little optimistic. Well, in any case, as soon as there's enough inside the chests, instead of putting it back into the furnace, it sets the cube onto the belt where it is then picked up by the matter synthesizer. The unloading speed is definitely becoming an issue, considering I've been compelled to remove the matter manually. But eventually the cube finds its way to the widget synthesizer and finally outputs what we'll need to make the next tier of tech cards. Looking at all of this, it's kind of awful, but hey, it works for now. So this thing is pretty inefficient, but still capable of churning through all the green science. On top of the rare earth metals, there's also stone, which is used to make bricks, sand, and then glass. It's a pretty low priority for now, but bricks are necessary to make furnaces, and I need them because I'm realizing that having only one crafting machine is really bad. While it might seem like you only need one because only one can be working at a time anyway thanks to the cube, the loading and unloading times are abysmal. Which is why I'm retrofitting another furnace alongside the first one. Doing it like this means that while one is unloading, the other one can be crafting. Realistically, with these basic inserters, there's no way that I can clear out and load 500 ore within the 6 seconds that each cycle takes, but it's an improvement at least. Fast inserters with no hand size upgrades can move 2.3 items from chest to chest per second, so with 6 that means it'll take about 18 seconds to unload 250 metals, and then another 18 to load 500 ores using twice as many inserters, since they can't do both simultaneously. I'll also try and speed up the matter materializer by adding more inserters as well. The recipe itself is 1 second, plus however long it takes to reinsert the cube, but with this many inserters, it'll take over 4 seconds to fully empty it, making this about 25% efficient. These are the types of things that you start to think about with the cube. But apart from that, it's mostly working as advertised. I was content to let it be awful, but the steam generation being slow is becoming too terrible to tolerate. Pipes can only transport so much fluid per second, dropping as low as 3,000 units per second with only 2 pieces of pipe, yet the boiler wants 13,000 units of water per second with only 1 input. Well, we can simply make some tanks and fill them with water. As long as the pump goes directly from tank to boiler, we'll be able to move the water in and the steam out fast enough to fully utilize the cube. Also, having lots of water in storage means I can stockpile it while the cube is away instead of needing to make a million offshore pumps. I've been slowly researching the things I'll need to make the next science, and while I've got no plans to try and salvage this mess any farther, I'm gonna set up some preliminary oil refining. It starts with this greenhouse to make wood, as well as some sand from the crusher, and finally steam. That'll make some gelatinous tar, which I can turn into refined tar and essential oils. The oils are used to make, elbow grease, and I don't really care about the other stuff because I'm just doing this to make advanced engine units. Like anything made in these ultra-dense furnaces, I'll need the cube to fuel it, but that'll give me my first tar, and then shortly afterwards, my first engine unit. The only reason I wanted these was because I wanted to make a car and explore around a bit. Now, the cube has a fuel value, which means it can be burned, so naturally... Not only does it make us go 300 kilometers per hour in a car, it also allows us to obliterate anything in our paths. Not cliffs though, not even the cube can take those on. There's no biters, which is a nice change of pace, and getting the lay of the land before you expand is always a good idea. Unfortunately, these kinds of drives are going to be rare because the cube has more important things to do than live inside my car, so back to work we go. As I've mentioned, this second starter base has pretty much run its course, but I'd like to automate everything that'll need to rebuild the new base first. Things like synthesizers, furnaces, recovery bays, inserters, belts, all that good stuff. The cube will be able to create these supplies continuously as I'm thinking about how to build a new base capable of making blue tech cards. One thing I appreciate is how straightforward most items are to automate compared to most other overhauls. Alright, time to build base number 3. Since it's necessary for everything, I'm building power first. Applying what I've learned, it's important to be able to maintain 13k water per second for extended periods of time, seeing as making lots of steam in one batch is the most convenient, and that means lots of water tanks. Using pumps between them is important to keep the water throughput high, and in theory, with 3 tanks connecting to 1 tank, it should be enough to maintain 13k. Then I'll need to attach the boiler and store the steam. It feels weird having the outputs on the boiler swapped compared to vanilla, but I guess it's more convenient having 2 steam outputs. Just like the water, I'll need to get the steam out of the way with pumps so that it doesn't clog up the machine. But this number of tanks should be enough to keep the lights on for quite a while. Most of the energy drain is from synthesizers, and only one can be working at a time, so I won't need to worry about much more than 50 megawatts of output. Now things get a little complicated. This time we're going to use this matter replication gel to make the matter. But why would we use this when I can already make it for free? Well, this is when I realized that I had to stop thinking with gear brain and start thinking with cube brain. While this recipe appears to add on an ingredient for absolutely nothing, this makes 1000 matter at once instead of 100, meaning that it wastes 1/10 of the cube's time as before. It takes steam and water as input and outputs steam and water, albeit less steam and more water than before. That means I'll need to set up some dedicated tanks for holding water and prioritize using that over the water from the offshore pumps. I'll also need to set up a separate tank for the steam, because while it loses steam by making the gel, if I just feed it off of a full tank of steam, it won't have anywhere to put the output and get backed up. So setting up a simple condition on the pumps that keeps them from totally filling up the tanks will ensure that there's always space. This time, instead of having only 1 matter synthesizer, I'm making 4 so that I'll be able to simply pass the cube from one to another and bypass the need to unload everything between cycles. This way, it'll be able to make 4000 matter in a matter of seconds. Similarly with the rare metals, I've got this recipe that uses refined ores instead. And while it might sound crazy that refining it results in getting less metals, as well as some annoying byproducts, once again, instead of making 250 metals at once, it makes 1000. I've started to realize that instead of making a closed system that hangs onto the cube until it's over a certain amount of time, it's best to make it go through a series so that it outputs a predictable amount. Making more at once means less burden on the cube, but it also means that the machines get to act as their own buffer. Rather than saying, hold on to this cube until you've made 4000 metal, it's best to say, send the cube through the series that creates 4000 metal. There's a mine to the west, and fast belts are so cheap that there's no reason I shouldn't simply belt all the ores all the way in. Again, we'll need refined ores, and that means crushing them first. 1 crusher per furnace should be enough, and I'll directly insert the ores. But there's also the byproducts I'll need to deal with. It spits out stone and calcium, neither of which have much of a use for now, so I'll just collect them in these chests. Also, perhaps because of how important buffers are in this mod, chests have been reduced to 20 slots in order to make decent stockpiles require a little more infrastructure. With the 2 most basic things done, I suppose I'll add where the cube will live. It'll just sit on this circular belt until one of the inserters picks it up and puts it onto a specific path towards the metal, matter, or steam or whatever. The inserters will read from the buffer, just like before, and only grab the cube if we're low on something. Sending the cube back is a bit of an issue, and I'm under no delusions that this is ideal, but I've got to make some sort of progress. That being said, it's all ready for a test drive. Unfortunately, using the cube here means that the old base won't be able to make supplies anymore, but you can see the general idea. The cube even has its own cube cam to keep track of it as it goes along. There it goes, making all the metals, taking 6 seconds between each machine. And eventually it's reactivated and put back onto the central belt. One issue is that to make the matter replication gel, I'll need matter first, which in this build takes matter replication gel. It's a bit of a catch-22, so I'll need to give it a little kickstart with some handcrafted stuff. But after that's sorted out, you can see how effectively the cube is being utilized. In a little over 5 seconds, the cube has made 4,000 units of matter. Nice. I don't want to go too much in depth since we're just rebuilding green science, but next I'll need to make the basic comprehension cards again. And wouldn't you know it, they've got an improved recipe as well. This time, to make 100 cards, it takes water and some of that calcium we've been getting from the refined ores. Nowhere near enough to consume all of it, however. It also spits out 8,000 steam, which on the surface is annoying because I need to deal with it, but it does mean free power, so I'm not complaining. Green circuits can go up here, and in defiance to the usual 3-to-2 ratio, here one wire assembler can supply 4 circuit assemblers. I'm still coming to grips with these 4x4 assemblers, but at least they allow me to make designs like this. Then it's the widgets again, but this time they take replication gel and steam while outputting water. It's a good thing I can just reuse those tanks I built for the replication gel for all these water and steam byproducts. And unlike the other recipes, which are strictly less resource efficient in exchange for faster crafting, this takes 4 metals per widget instead of the old 10. Also, the cube still needs to be revitalized between each step. Needing to fit the recovery bays between each synthesizer makes me miss those adjustable inserters from C-Block. When everything's done, the cube gets spat out quite far away from its home, and bringing the cube back takes time, so I've decided that despite looking kind of silly, I'm going to bring it back with these chains of long-handed inserters, since they can move a single item much faster than belts. I was tempted to unleash the forbidden power of stationary cargo wagons for the near instantaneous transportation, but I'll leave that eldritch magic well enough alone. Now I'll just rebuild the green cards and bring over all the labs, and now this new base is all caught up with the old one. The inserter bucket brigade is pretty funny to watch. Unfortunately, I've already got all the basic research, so this hasn't accomplished much, and I've got to move on to the blue cards. The main thing I'll need for those is oil refining, and I'm doing it for real this time. I'm setting it up in a similar fashion as the metals, with each furnace having its own greenhouse. I'll also be able to use the stone byproduct from the ore refining process to make the sand it needs. It also takes steam, but at this point, what doesn't? This will make 40,000 units of tar per trip, cube willing, and all that's left to do is refine it. It just takes some chemical plants to break it into the refined tar and oils, and then some more chemical plants to make the grease and unstable gas. Both of them require tar and oil, just in different amounts, and seeing as we'll be needing much more gas than grease, we'll have a lot of leftover oil that'll clog up the machines. Unfortunately, we can't even research the way to deal with an imbalance yet, so this is the best I've got. Next, I'll need some glass, which is made from sand. I'll just borrow that from the tar furnaces and set it up real quick. The glass is first for these advanced circuits, which take glass, circuits, and wires, as well as that gas we just made. Another ingredient I'll need is intelligent calcium, which is made by combining calcium with a comprehension card easily stolen from the labs. I just like to show off this cool bit of side loading so they can output the wires directly onto the belt for the advanced circuits. After that, I'll make some Besselheim flasks. And at this point, it's important to mention that half of this mod's references are from the British science parody show Look Around You. Those will be used alongside with the intelligent calcium to make bottled consciousness. And with some more belt tricks, I'm able to reuse the advanced circuit belt first for the intelligent calcium before switching sides, then for the bottled consciousness, because I'll need both of these to make blue cards. I can't actually make the bottled consciousness, however, and that's because they require cerebral substrate. But first, thanks to all this gas and glass demand, the stone byproduct from the metals is far from enough, so I've actually got to set up a stone mine. And once again, I'm very thankful for the cheap red belts. Now for the cerebral substrate. It's weird because unlike anything else, it takes the dormant cube as input. And while it might be possible to make it piggyback off of one of the furnaces first, it's much easier to just build a boiler nearby and burn it first. Once it's dormant, it's just a matter of reinserting it over and over again until we've got enough. The only other ingredient is matter replication gel, but that's right next door and as easy as running a pipe. Once I've got enough substrate, it's also important to remember to actually reactivate the cube before putting it back on the belt. Then I've got to pipe all this stuff all the way down here, and there we are. Bottled intelligence. I'm sure this is all completely ethical. The only thing left are some advanced engine units, which take normal engine units, as well as metals and circuits. Once again, I can fit this whole thing into this footprint with some finagling, and then I'll simply need to add in the grease. This is really the only use for grease outside of faster belts. From there, it's a matter of setting up the assemblers, attaching the belts, and then we've got blue tech cards, or abstract interrogation cards as they're called. In this mod, you only get to see the unresearched technologies as soon as you've researched the cards for them. Perhaps to make things less overwhelming, or perhaps to jump scare you with all the sudden complexity. These cards have opened up a lot of new stuff, but the one I'm most excited for is loaders. I've just got to research dimensional manipulation. Phantom cubes? This mod is getting stranger by the second. Well, evidently, it'll be a while before I can research that, so in the meantime, I'm going through the painstaking process of completely rebuilding my supplies, because I was still stuck thinking with gear brain when I first built it. In normal Factorio, you're rewarded for taking the extra time to set up your supply network, and yet I neglected to realize that by attaching it to the old base, it would cease to work the moment I took the cube away. Not only that, but I built it in such a way that it would be a royal pain to feed from the new base, so I'm just building a new one. At least it'll be a while before this one becomes obsolete. Now, despite being used in basic comprehension cards and interrogation cards, calcium keeps piling up. It's coming at a rate much faster than I can consume it, and there's no weapons in this mod, so I can't even blow up the chests. What I can do is try to make some bricks, then turn that into concrete, because the concrete recipe takes some calcium with it. At least I'll be able to pave my base with it, and it'll hold back the calcium avalanche for a little while. Next on the agenda is construction robots, and for that I'll need batteries, which requires making sulfuric acid first. The sulfur comes from combining refined tar with water, and it spits out essential oils as well as some more steam. The oil can go back into the tanks, and while I could feed the steam back into the system, I'd rather just vent it. Then to make the sulfuric acid, I'll need that as well as some raw ores. The batteries are just that, plus some metals. It does mean I need to route it all the way through my base, but I've already given up on this one. It's spaghetti time. None of this stuff is for science, for now at least, and I'm just trying to cobble together an assortment of things that'll let me build the new stuff I've unlocked. This sophisticated matter included, because it's necessary to make this dimensional folding engine. This beast will allow me to banish the cube to the spirit realm and temporarily use phantom cubes. And, oh my. Somehow I failed to notice that this machine's power draw is a staggering 250 megawatts. And the lights are back on. But more than that, I've got 64 phantom cubes. Much like the matter, I can use the phantom cube to create an infinite amount of these ghost crystals. I've still got to reactivate them between cycles, however, and I've got this thing set up so that when it finishes in the recovery bay, it goes straight back into the folding engine. I'm not sure if it was obvious, but when our cube is trapped between realms, it means we can't make anything else that requires it in the meantime. Just like we initially spread the cube across 64 parallel ghost dimensions, we've got to recombine all 64 to get our cube back. Alright, I'll throw the cube back where it belongs, and the reason I wanted these ghost crystals is because I can throw them into a furnace to create spectrolite. I'll need lots of it later, but right now it's a necessary ingredient in loaders. Remember when I was complaining about how long it took to unload the machines? Well, loaders can unload 30 items per second and are capable of saturating an entire belt on their own. That's great, but obviously something so powerful has to have a downside. Even if they're doing absolutely nothing, these things drain 100 kilowatts. It might not sound like much when we have machines that demand hundreds of megawatts, but it adds up fast, and when power comes at the cost of the cube's time, it's not to be underestimated. So we'll be using them sparingly. Predictably, oils have backed up, but now I've got the technology to turn the excess back into unrefined tar. It's a little more convoluted than the usual cracking, but it'll balance things out eventually. And after getting distracted a bit, time to finally make construction robots. They take some bottled consciousnesses, which contain some implications that I'd rather not think about, but hey, construction robots. The roboports are also an upgrade from vanilla, which is nice because it means I'll need less of them to cover my entire base. Every time I go back to playing vanilla Factorio after playing a bunch of mods, the one thing I definitely miss the most are the upgraded roboports. As it turns out, one greenhouse isn't enough to keep up with the tar demand. Unlike literally any other Factorio run, you can't just calculate the throughput based on the crafting speed, because while the furnace would need about 100 wood each second to meet demand, it's only running when the cube comes by. So you've just got to guess how often that is. At this point, a significant portion of my cube's time is spent making energy, so I'll definitely want to upgrade moving forwards. There's uranium energy, but it takes a new resource called immersite that requires a massive drill. It's quite rare, and at first I didn't even realize that it was an actual resource patch because they're just really far away. It requires the cube to run, so, oops. Well, I guess I'll figure that out later. Even if I didn't break it, there's no way I'd be able to send the cube all the way out there. Not with this setup, at least. So it's time to accept that this base is about as good as it's ever going to get. The cube delivery system is incredibly restrictive. It's just barely capable of making blue, let alone the other cards. So for the third time, I'm going to need to build a new base entirely from scratch. I've got robots this time, though. All I'm really missing are cliff explosives, and those are made by turning mashed potatoes into ethanol, and then turning that into explosives. I'll also want something to fuel trains, so here's some dirty vehicle fuel. Okay, if it's ever seemed like anything I've done here was competent, I'd like to dispel those rumors immediately. This mod is truly unique, and on your first attempt it's going to break your brain. There were times I found myself just driving around in circles in the wasteland while suffering from a terminal case of analysis paralysis. I don't want to need to rebuild for a fourth time, and so I'd like this base to be the final one, but unlike any other Factorio mod, there's no scalability. Ordinarily, if I build circuits and start running low later on, I can simply add on some more production, but not so with the cube. There is only one cube, and the only way to scale is improving cube efficiency. Bad builds are bad forever, and so you start stressing about how much supply you should build for things that you don't even know the use for yet, while simultaneously worrying about how efficient it is. Combine that with needing to start from scratch, and that's why you'll find it took me several hours to build this one forge setup. Well, you'll see that this design has 3 times the forges as before, and uses loaders to quickly fill up the 6 buffers to create 6 lanes of metals. 1 crusher per forge seems to work well enough, and I've added in some chests that'll store refined ores to make sure the forges will be able to weather sudden spikes in demand. There's an escape belt for the stone and calcium byproducts, and I still need to worry about calcium overflows, but after worrying about it forever, I've decided that I'll just deal with it like I have been in the old base. Yeah, I might not have weapons, but I've got the cube. Just need to make sure I don't accidentally lose control because it has massive acceleration and it will blow a hole through my entire base.
Calcium is completely neutralized.
Anyway, this is when I started making some poor decisions, but I'll talk about that later. The important thing is how I'm going to move the cube around. Naturally, the solution is trains, but remember how fast the cube made our car? Well, it'll do that for the train as well. So with zero ambiguity, moving the cube around via train is the way to go. Eventually it'll be set up so that the cube will be dropped into the bottom furnace and then picked up at the top, but it'll be quite a while before we're ready to put the cube in here. Next, whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed in a mod, I'll start putting things onto trains. That way it's impossible for me to build myself into a corner, and it ensures that it's always expandable. I'm also going to use these loaders, because I've decided that they can't have a downside if you just remove power to them when they're not needed. Frankly, I'm just excited to finally have a legitimate use for the power switch. It's just a simple circuit that sends power to the loaders if there's a train in the station or the chests are empty. Looking back, the design is a little clumsy, but the idea is solid. I'll also do the same thing for the stations that'll pick up the calcium and stone byproducts. And like before, buffers are very important to keep the metals from clogging up. Unfortunately, I'm not eager to power up this base if I can afford it because of the unnecessary drain it would cause on the other base's power, so you're just going to need to live with the flashing signs. Now to rebuild matter replication gel, and we've already been over this, so there's not too much to say about it. But again, I'll need these tanks to always have some room to fit the output from the recipes. As before, I'll just need 2 furnaces to swap the cube between them, and I probably could have gotten away with only 1, but better safe than sorry. Speaking of power, everything I'm going to be doing for the foreseeable future will be to get a source of power that's better than cube steam. As to what that technology actually is, I'll leave you in suspense, but from what I've seen, making any sort of late-game base without upgrading your power first is completely out of the question. That being said, we'll still need to boil some water because many recipes require steam as an ingredient, but without using it for power, it'll last way longer. I'm designing the cube train to be a simple one-wagon bidirectional train for maximum maneuverability, and this steam stop can share the rail with a replication gel stop because there will only ever be one cube train. And once again, I'm setting up some stations to drop off stuff like metals. Now obviously we've got to remake the matter, but this is when my brain anguish was at its peak, because once again I've got to make some monumental decisions that'll affect the entire base. But there's a third matter recipe. Sending the cube to the Shadow Realm is necessary to create ghost crystals, and as you'll recall, that precludes us from making anything else. However, there is a way to make matter using the ghost cubes. It only gives 100 at a time, but when the cube's been fractured into 64 separate cubes, suddenly multi-threading the cube is more than just a dream. So while we're making ghost crystals, we'll also be making our matter. Each one of these will pick up their own cube and pass it back and forth until the internal storage reaches a certain level. Oh yeah, and I've finally connected this new base to the old one with roboports. Just like the metals, I'm building for 6 lanes, and since you need matter to make the matter replication gel, I've got it set up to prioritize sending it backwards to the gel furnaces. The cubes will be moved around via belts, which feels a little inefficient, but I've got to make some progress or else I'll go insane. There's one problem, however. My plan is to pass the same cube back and forth, but if I just pick up cubes off of the belts, the 2 machines will both end up with a cube inside of them and get locked up. The solution is to make a simple memory cell in addition to the usual logic we've been using. When the long-handed inserter picks up a cube, I'll read that as a pulse into a memory cell. The cell will hold on to the cube signal and use that to disable the long-handed inserter as long as it's present. Then the filter inserter will wait until its chest is almost full. After that, it'll be allowed to pick up the cube, and by reading its hand, I'll know that the cube was taken out and that it's time to reset the memory cell for the next cycle, thus allowing the long-handed inserter to move again. Not terribly complicated, but still somewhat fiddly. I should probably mention that a working knowledge of circuit networks helps tremendously in this mod. I'll load that onto trains with the same design as the metals, and now it's time to think about the other use for the ghost cubes. This whole thing will only use 12 out of the 64 available cubes, so there's still plenty left over to make the ghost crystals. I changed my mind about the design like 4 times, but it's very similar to the matter. The main reason to have 2 synthesizers is to give the other one time to unload, but after thinking back on it, ghost crystals only stack to 50, and unlike the matter, the phantom needs to be recharged between each cycle for 2 seconds, so I definitely could have gotten away with just 1. Just as before, we only want 1 cube in each system, so we'll be using the exact same memory cell technology as before. It'll be great when I can actually turn this thing on. Then I'll add a balancer and another train, and now all that's left to do is throw it into some furnaces. The vast majority of the ghost crystals will go into spectralite, and I'm tentatively shooting for about 60 signs per minute, so making a bunch of these seems like a safe bet. After worrying so much about the cube, it's nice to make something that just takes an input and makes an output asynchronously for a change. It's starting to feel like this base is actually shaping up. There's another recipe I can use with the phantom cubes, and it makes both widgets and comprehension cards at the same time. Just like before, the ability to multi-thread these once single-threaded processes seems great on the surface, but taking a closer look at it, the recipe is back to taking 10 metals each per widget. That's 5 times as much, plus the fact that I'll need widgets and cards in other ratios than 1-to-1, so it would be necessary to set up normal cards with a normal cube anyway. And something I haven't mentioned yet that you may have started to question yourself. Yeah, these synthesizers take 50 megawatts each, and I'm trying to run like 24 of them at once. So after thinking about it further, I've decided that it's probably something good if you're trying to optimize for infinite research, but more trouble than it's worth otherwise. That's a weight off my shoulders, so I'll focus on other things for now, like oil. Unlike the rare earth metals, my base isn't built around an existing stone patch, so that means I'll need to set up a stone mine elsewhere and send trains in, but that goes up pretty fast. I'm setting up 2 train stops for the stone. One will be from the mines, and the other one will be from the ore crushers. We want to use up the stone byproduct first, so a simple priority input splitter will do the trick. Next, stone is nearly worthless, so we'll need to turn it all into sand. And if I've learned anything, it's that I'll need a lot more of these than I think. This should be enough to turn 2 red belts of stone into 4 belts of sand, or 120 units of sand per second for all you viewers who haven't memorized all the Factorio items yet. Alright, I said stone is nearly worthless outside of sand, but this is why it's only nearly. I need bricks, because apart from being used in only like 2 buildings, they're also used to make concrete. It might not sound that important, but concrete is a necessary ingredient in making one of the data cards we're going after, so I'll need some actual production. And since I'm talking about it, might as well knock it out right now. It also takes some sand and calcium, and fortunately I've got loads of sand nearby, but the calcium will need to come via train. Seriously, these builds seem to spring up fast whenever the cube's not involved. Anyway, I can reuse the brick furnace design and start pasting the furnaces I'll need to turn the sand into glass. Since glass is a necessary ingredient in advanced circuits as well as Besselheim flasks, I'll need a good amount of production. It's nice when you're in the part of the game where you can just start stamping down blueprints, certain in the knowledge that they'll all eventually be built by your army of robot slaves. Now with added consciousness, because what's the point of making robot slaves if they can't suffer like we do? As I mentioned, this was mostly to get tar processing up and running, so that's next. Being a cube product, it'll need to be built next to some tracks, but this stop isn't for the cube, it's actually for a coal train. There's an upgraded tar recipe, and it's much like the first one, except that it takes coal and makes 40k tar at once, making it very efficient. Coal can only be sourced as a byproduct from immersite refining, which we're not doing yet, but seeing as I want this base to last me to the end, it seems prudent to design for it from the start. I'm also making tons of greenhouses because I'm not running the risk of having too little wood this time. The only ingredient is water, and so there's virtually no downside other than space to overbuilding them. Now I'll fit in the cube train, and as much as I'd like to leave it like this, I might not always have access to coal, so I'm gonna need to set up the normal variant as well. Since it only makes 16k compared to the 40k of the other recipe, I'll want a lot more of them to make the cube's trip worthwhile, but apart from that, it's the exact same as the first one, minus the coal. As usual, each furnace has its own recovery bay that takes the cube and outputs it to the next furnace in series. This is also one of the few uses for steam that we have, so I'll need to run a pipe from the steam stop. Then the tar will be pumped directly into a bunch of buffer tanks before feeding directly into the chemical plants, which are again pretty straightforward. That outputs nicely into some more tanks, and then I can set up the, well, it's not called cracking, it's tar reclamation. And I'd like to shout out the flow control mod coming standard with Ultracube, because outside of a few QOLs, I generally stick to only the required or recommended mods of any given overhaul, seeing as it's ostensibly the way the mod maker intended it to be played. Oh yeah, and because the reclamation needs to balance both, I've got a simple circuit setup that stops the pump from feeding it if both tanks are balanced. Hey, alright, there's still so much ahead of us before I can even begin to make science, but at least I can knock out the gas and the grease. I definitely didn't need this many grease plants, but I'm a man of aesthetics. Next, sulfur is absolutely pivotal in my quest for better power generation, as well as many other things, so I'll want a good amount of these. They take water, which is already here thanks to the greenhouses, and it still outputs steam, but unlike last time, I'm actually going to route it back into the tar furnaces. That sulfur is not only used in sulfuric acid, but also explosives, which are required to make the deep introspection cards. I don't have everything I need to make them yet, but it's nice to have them laid out beforehand, and it's heartening to know that along with the concrete, I've already got one half of those tech cards finished. Then I'll make these 3 stops, one to pick up the concrete, one to pick up the explosives, and another to pick up the glass. With that taken care of, the only ingredient I'm missing for acid is raw ore. And at this point, it's time to mention the gradual shift in mindset that I've been experiencing over the last couple hours. I've even gone as far as deconstructing these metal trains, and that's because I've had an epiphany. I've started building things a lot more compact, and I've stopped putting absolutely everything onto trains. Normally, adding lots of trains is great for expandability and a good way to approach mods because it removes some of the guesswork about demand, seeing as you can just add another station if you're running low on something. Watch my C block run if you want to see what that looks like in practice. However, it requires some more upfront effort than just connecting things with belts, and that's when it hit me. Who cares about expandability? The cube is always going to be the limiting factor, so expandability isn't even an issue. Gearbrains strikes again. And not only that, having tons of trains in the network is actively bad, because they might get in the way of the cube train and slow it down. Basically, I've realized that just running belts is a million times easier and has none of the downsides usually associated with it. And that results in this massive belt that runs raw ore all the way from the mines, through the chemical plants, and to the sulfuric acid machines. It's an interesting experience going from underthinking to overthinking, and then finally settling on middle thinking. But things are going much easier now that I'm not planning for expansions that will never happen. Alright, next thing I'll need is ethanol. And yes, this is still all in the pursuit of electricity, but it's also necessary for making explosives, so putting it here seems prudent. Last time we made this, it was just for some cliff explosives, but now it's time to build it at scale. The main ingredient is mashed potatoes, which are grown in greenhouses just like the wood and only require water. I don't think I'll need too much of this stuff, but once again, better safe than sorry. While it's really easy to make, it's going to be necessary for an extremely critical part of my factory, so making sure that I won't ever need to worry about it is good for my health. Apart from the potatoes, all it takes is some oil and water, which we can conveniently locate nearby. One of the benefits of compacting everything. And there we are, ethanol. Unfortunately, we can't drink it. It's still going to be a while before I'm ready to migrate the cube, seeing as it's still diligently making all of the supplies I'll need for this base, but I'm tired of seeing all of the belts and tanks permanently empty, so I'm just gonna throw the cube in for a bit. This is a preview of what it'll look like when I'm finally ready to bring it over here permanently. Seriously though, seeing what's inside of the pipes and on the belts makes it much easier to visualize builds. It's time for cerebral substrate once again, and just like before, I've got to make a random boiler so I can get the dormant cube. That means some headaches moving some steam around, but I can just hook it in with the output of the sulfur and use that to feed the tar production. As usual, the cube will be passed back and forth because 8,000 fluid per second is a lot to drain. Butting these tanks against the output should theoretically move 6,000 fluid per second, which is why we'll still need 2. As you can see, now that I've abandoned expandability, things are becoming a little more spur of the moment. I never even ended up using that glass train, and I just ran the belt straight to the right. And since I've still got to make the conductive cables for the explosives, I can simply fit it into this space here and run those metals we made through. Isn't spaghetti wonderful? It mixes with sand, and there it is. Not that important in our quest for power, but it's good to know that that's one thing off of the list. Some of that glass will go through here to be turned into Besselheim flasks, seeing as we'll be needing them soon. But once again, the need to rebuild something that we've already set up 3 times rears its ugly head. However, this is almost the last thing that I'll need to rebuild, so there is light at the end of this tunnel. Anyway, we need the comprehension cards. Not because I've got to do research, God knows that's some ways off, but I still need to make intelligent calcium. Making 100 of these cards per machine might sound like a lot, but where we're going, a bottled consciousness is going to become a premium product. Just like before, it takes in water and spits out steam, which will be nice because it'll mean less demand on the cube steam. Running the cube through this gambit will result in 1,200 cards when it's all done, and these loaders should be fast enough to clear out that 100 cards in time. That's good because I'm gonna make the cube go through this whole marathon twice before being put back onto the train, resulting in 2,400 cards and almost 200k steam. It used another memory cell, but I didn't actually set that up until hours later, so just take my word for it that that's what it's supposed to do. Now we can make the intelligent calcium. Seeing as the cards themselves already take calcium, and it's only used to make one thing in the entire game, building them here is simple enough. And we're back to making the bottled consciousness using the substrate and flasks I just set up. It's used in science, but more than that, it'll be instrumental in my plans to power this base. There's some recipes later that will output empty flasks, so I've gone ahead and added a belt which will be a priority input to use those up first. And we're getting weird again because the next step in our adventure brings us to emotional decomposition. Using the cube, we can combine ethanol with massive amounts of cerebral substrate to extract liquid joy and liquid despair. How exciting! Apart from the surreal subject matter, making it is actually pretty straightforward, just like any other cube product. Since it takes so much substrate and spits out so much fluid at once, using 8 machines is a good idea. The worst thing that can happen is the cube gets stuck inside of a machine while it slowly fills, and this is to prevent that. The main difficulty is just needing to route around 4 different fluid inputs and outputs, but once again, thanks to the special elbow pipes from Flow Control, I can actually route 2 fluids right next to each other. Now, like any good engineer, I'll just lock away all of my despair inside of a reinforced steel tank. For all the talk of ignoring trains, I'm still loading some of the science ingredients onto trains, so I've got another train stop set up to pick up some of the bottled consciousness, but the rest of it will be needed over here. We're going to mix our joy and despair together with our bottled consciousness to create bottled euphoria and bottled anguish, respectively. There's very little practical use for happiness, however, and it's mostly a waste product. We need some, but to ensure that my factory doesn't come to a halt due to excessive joy, I'll need to bottle it first and then release it as steam. There's another use for it where you can quickly recover dormant phantom cubes for 1/200th the energy cost, but I don't want the hassle. The really valuable stuff is bottled anguish, and we're so close to my goal I'm starting to feel some joy myself, and then anguish because I'm still not there yet. Another very important ingredient I'll need are batteries. This is what 90% of our sulfuric acid will be used for, and they're thankfully quite easy to set up. The only difficult part is running the sulfuric acid from all the way over here, but this base has become a sort of sophisticated spaghetti hybrid. However, if you can believe it, this is the last thing we'll need before I can upgrade my power generation. I've just got to move all these belts out of the way because I've decided that I want the space and they're taking up valuable real estate between the Phantom Cube Zone. The final ingredient is ectoplasm, which, as I've mentioned, takes Phantom Cubes. Just like before, I'm going to use my trick of capturing 1 cube and passing it back and forth until I'm done with it. But again, in hindsight, I didn't need 2 synthesizers for this. Oh well, this still looks kinda cool. Anyway, the other ingredients for ectoplasm are ghost crystals, unstable gas, and our most recent addition to the family, bottled anguish. I'd just like to remind you that everything that I've been doing for these past 20 minutes has been explicitly just to get to this step. These things only make 200 ectoplasm at a time, and dimensional folding is a big time investment, so I'll just want to make a good amount of these to ensure that I'll always have ectoplasm on hand. Oh yeah, and they also spit out some empty flasks. Ah, our beautiful ectoplasm. All that's left to do is set up the circuit conditions, but you should have the idea by now. As much as I'd like to turn this thing on and make our first ectoplasm, trying that would cause the mother of all brownouts. My entire power grid is like 80 megawatts, and this whole Phantom Cube operation would demand over 1 gigawatt. Making that much power is a little out of our reach, but in one of my finer moments, I set up accumulator automation, and so I'll be able to paste tons and tons of accumulators. These accumulators will allow me to slowly build up energy and use it all at once, so even my dinky little power setup will be able to run this massive operation. Granted, it's allowed to charge them completely. Each accumulator stores 10 megajoules, meaning 100 could meet the power demands of this whole setup for 1 second. Obviously, we'll need a lot of these things. But with them fully charged, I'm excited to finally turn this thing on. I'll grab the cube from the old base, and first I'll need to make some matter replication gel, but here we go. And there goes the power. All those accumulators drained in mere moments. Well, whatever. My only goal was to make some ghost crystals. Next, I'll need to make this cerebral substrate. Joy and despair. And finally, bottled anguish. Now at last we're ready to make the ectoplasm. To avoid another power outage, I'm only using 2 cubes this time. This is exciting though, because I'll only need a little bit of this ectoplasm to get everything kicked off. After watching that for a bit, I look at my old base and I realize with horror that the steam buffer is almost empty. I quickly try to slam the phantom cubes back into the folding machine, but it's too late. This isn't a brownout, this is a complete blackout. And you want to know the real problem? My cube's only 10% folded, and without the cube I've got no way of actually making more power. Well, I guess those backup turbines aren't as useless as I said they were. It's only gonna take 20 minutes to salvage my cube at this rate. I find some extra steam to help it along, but I've learned a valuable lesson today. Now I've just got to cold start my entire power grid, which is a little rough seeing as the pumps that are required to move the steam also take power. But eventually I get things sorted out. Alright, we're almost there, I swear. I just forgot that I needed to make sophisticated matter as well. As a matter of fact, that takes matter, and that's all the way up here, so I'm just gonna move it all the way down there. If this doesn't epitomize my complete shift in attitude towards this base, I don't know what will. And the best part is, this is legitimately the best way of handling it. As before, sophisticated matter is just regular matter plus unrefined tar. I'm not sure what part of smearing tar all over it makes it sophisticated, but maybe that's just because I'm not sophisticated enough to understand it. There, now we have everything we need. And I can finally introduce you to the MVP of this run, the Haunted Energy Cell. They're made in chemical plants and take a combination of batteries, sophisticated matter, and our ectoplasm. Not only are these necessary to create the other science we're after, synthetic premonition cards, they also have an energy value of 400 megajoules. But they're not burned, no, they're used in these Stygian energy labs. To make things simple, I'm aiming for a maximum of 400 megawatts of continuous power, which means I'll need 1 haunted cell per second and around 24 labs to consume them. The labs themselves do not produce steam, but instead vomit out void winds, as well as some residual tendrils. Yeah, you heard right. Apparently summoning phonic forces to power my factory has some consequences. But like any good engineer, we can automate expelling dimensional horrors. The dimensional folding machine will help us expel them back to their home dimension. It takes the cube and can store up to 40,000 tendrils before it backs up. It's not perfect, and it'll still spit out a random amount of tendrils after every expulsion. And again, because I need to fit it into the cube's busy schedule, I need a way to know when it's time to fold. Another memory cell that reads the belts will do just fine. It'll count up, and once it's over 20,000, it knows that it's ready to fold and can request the cube. Also, when the cube is inserted, it subtracts 20,000 from the memory cell. Now all I've got to do is set up the heavy turbines, and unlimited power will be mine! Just look at that pulsating meat. I've done a lot of things in Factorio, but powering my base with tormented spirits from beyond the pale is definitely a new one. You can see the tendrils flowing in, and with this upgrade to my power grid, I can actually turn on the phantom cubes. Kind of. I'm not sure you fully grasped the true demand of this thing. I'll need some more accumulators to make it seamless, but I can at least maintain this matter production and also fill up my tanks with ectoplasm. Running out of spooky juice would be very problematic. After the matter's all full, I open up the ghost crystals as well, and I can tell you that it's been having some problems. The ghost cubes appear to be getting out of the machines without resetting the memory cell, which means it won't ever be able to pick up another cube until I manually reset it. I'm not too concerned, since it's most likely due to low power, which can be once again resolved with more accumulators. Now it's time for the inconceivable. I'm actually going to use assemblers and make all of the things necessary for science. Once again, I'm aiming roughly for 60 SPM, and whether my designs will be up to the task, who knows, but it's a good guide for how many assemblers to build. Obviously, the first thing on the agenda is green circuits. It's nice and compact with these underground belts, and it seems no matter the mod, you can never escape needing to make a million of these things. We'll need the spectrolite soon, and so I'll just make another extremely long belt right next to my matter belt. Also, the glass can come along as well, and join us on the main bus to victory. Next is advanced circuits, but I can just completely reuse the same design I used for the green circuits, because who cares about proper cable to circuit ratios when I can just build it instantly? Only difference is I'll need to run some unstable gas through the center, and one major advantage of these 4x4 assemblers is that there's enough room to fit an inserter next to the pipes. Then I'll make those advanced engine units. Unfortunately, I can't just copy the entire design again, but I can at least do it for the side that makes basic engine units. From there, it's a simple matter of directly inserting those basic engine units into the assemblers and running metals and circuits down the middle. Once again, it's amazing how fast things go when I'm back in my element. Oh yeah, and the grease needs to be hooked up. There's a lot of random pipes in this base. By the way, all this concrete isn't just because it looks good, it's because it's the only way to keep the old base from overflowing with calcium. Anyway, that's actually everything I'll need to completely rebuild all the science, except for the widgets, but do I even need to explain them at this point? Yeah, I'll bring in the cube by train and go through all these synthesizers to make widgets. It just makes widgets, okay? Hopefully this will be the last time I need to borrow the cube and move it by hand, but it's still fun watching this thing kill all my power. At least I realized I could use the backup generators to power the pumps, so at least the power will stay at maximum output despite being under demand. When you get down to it, there's actually very little that you need to make using assemblers to get science in this mod, and so the last pure assembler product I've got to make are these spectral processors. Each one takes a staggering 400 ghost wires, so I'll need 4 assemblers feeding a single processing unit assembler. By the way, the assemblers have a crafting speed of exactly 1, and almost everything has a whole number for crafting times, making calculating ratios pretty straightforward. These spectral processors alone are going to use something like 95% of all the spectrolite we'll ever produce. And going back to how easy the ratios are, since it takes 10 seconds to make one and one processor to make a data card, we'll just need 10 of these to make one per second. That's why I built 12 of them. Yeah, I just thought it looked better with 12. Sue me. Moving on, that's actually all we needed to make the premonition cards. Yeah, it just kinda sneaks up on you. Because I needed the haunted energy cells and bottled anguish for power, everything else just felt kinda secondary. So I'll just research those cards, and I think it's about time I finally moved that cube to its new home. It feels crazy considering that it's been 24 hours since I started building this base, but again, the plan all along has been to put the cube on a train. Just like the old base had a belt circle, I've made a train circle. Now I've got to go through the painstaking process of setting up every single train stop to only enable when there's a demand for that product. As well as actually set up moving the cube on and off the train because I was lazy when I was first setting these things up. Despite the train, moving the cube on and off still requires a little finesse, so I'm using inserter chains where possible. This one will only let the cube go into the coal tar furnaces if there's enough coal. To actually finalize the move, I've just got to set up the tech cards themselves, but they're really easy. Most of them share the exact same ratio, and none of them require more than 4 items, so setting up each one is simply a matter of copying the same design 5 times, and then lots and lots of belt routing. Again, we've got everything we need, so it's just a matter of feeding them into the assemblers. Something like bottled anguish takes a little bit more effort, but we can swing by the haunted energy cells and pick those up as well. Also, the power plants get a priority output on the batteries for obvious reasons. Those trains down there will bring in the bottled consciousness, concrete, and explosives for blue and purple science respectively. Also, I completely forgot that these premonition cards spit out residual tendrils as well, so I've got to deal with them, but I can just run that all the way over here and hook it into the output from the Stygian Energy Labs. Okay, now it's finally time to set up the schedule of the cube train. When it's not needed, I'm just gonna make it spin around and around. I'm gonna be honest, this thing is kind of terrifying. Regardless, the train's schedule will be to head to the first open station on the list, and then wait there until the cube's been put back into its inventory. The wait time is to ensure that it doesn't immediately leave, seeing as it's already carrying the cube when it enters, and it's important to make the conditions time-weighted and if cargo contains cube. But with everything set up, here we go on its maiden voyage. There were a couple hiccups, like forgetting to set the wagon to only be able to carry the cube, and accidentally having the schedule set to or instead of and, causing the train to leave the cube behind, but apart from that, it's beautiful. And the power went out. Again. Of course it's because the tendrils are backed up. It's not because my design's broken, it's because I just forgot to add the expulsion stop to the train's schedule. At least the cube's not trapped in the ghost world this time, but I still need power to fold, so I'll just... Oh my god, okay. Do not try to change the recipe when there's 40,000 of one item inside of a machine. As much as I'd love to clean up this mess with robots, I'm kind of in the middle of a power crisis right now, so I'm just gonna reload. Here we are cleaning off the belts. You've got to love the way the lights just slowly turn back on. Thanks to that, my tendril count is way off, so I've got to clear these things out and reset the memory cells. But you've seen tendril expulsion, so here's tendril explosion. You gotta love this cube cam feature. It's relaxing to watch the fruits of your labor in all its glory. It doesn't work so well with the phantom cubes, however. And after letting it run for a while, all the buffers are full and the cube's just here waiting. I love watching the little image of the train spinning like crazy. Remember when I crashed into that drill 30 hours ago? Well, it's time to finally start extracting some deep core ore. Seeing as I've already got concrete and explosives, half of the purple cards are already finished, but the other half takes this purple stuff. And I just realized I called it a Mersite earlier by accident. But it's really far away and it takes the cube. However, thanks to our turbo speed train, it shouldn't take too long to bring it out here. The drill mine's crazy fast, and the only way to move it effectively is to make the drill output directly into a box. Even the biggest box the game gives you isn't enough to contain a full cube's worth of ore, so I'll want plenty of loaders to move the ore into some other containers. And it's something I've mostly gone without because my train designs ended up being worthless, but I'm back to the power-switched loaders. Considering how much loaders are draining my power from having 36 on my metals alone, I wish I'd designed around it more, because it's actually incredibly easy to just read a container or a belt to know when they should be powered. The deep core ore needs to be crushed first, and yeah, try saying that 5 times fast. Deep core ore, deep core ore, deep core ore. Anyway, it spits out some more byproducts. There's stone, as well as the coal I mentioned earlier. It makes as many byproducts as it does the actual powder, so dealing with it is pretty important. This should be enough production to take care of everything, and 2 lanes of belt should be enough to move it all. Now I'm just gonna load all of this onto trains. The problem with building in places like this is that I don't have my trusty robot network to build everything for me. The coal trains will go to the tar processing, and the stone trains will go to that priority stop in the sand processing, just like the output of the metal furnaces. Coming out here and only using the drill once seems like a waste, so I set up another memory cell to make it insert the cube twice before putting it back onto the train. However, the box fills up fast, and it's up to the loaders to empty it and make more space. Unfortunately, I forgot to account for the mining productivity when I calculated how much ore it needed to move, and that meant the cube got stuck for longer than I'd intended. Well, you live and you learn. What matters is I've got access to deep core powder, as well as coal. Oh yeah, and I've put efficiency modules in all the Phantom Cube machines. Minus 40% energy consumption goes a long way for 1.6 gigawatts. But after making the move here, you'll never guess what I had to set up again. That's right, for the 4th time I'm building supplies. But thankfully, this is the last time I'll ever need to do this. And it's much easier this time because thanks to the premonition cards I've just made, I've researched requester chests, so now I can just handle this whole thing with logistics bots. Though, for some reason the logistics bots recipe gives me 2 separate bots, and one is slower but carries more cargo. It's weird, but they work all the same. It takes a while to build up my Logibot population, but pretty soon I've got more than enough to build anything I need. Now for that deep core stuff. The first one is incredibly easy, or at least it is thanks to my bus nearby. And it's kind of funny to me that with this, the metals bus basically ends up going in a giant circle. But anyway, we make resplendent plates in these furnaces. They also take glass and sophisticated matter on top of the powder, but that's it really. That's 3/4 of the card finished already. The next one is a little more complicated, and don't ask why I put this calcium stop here when its source is literally 10 meters to the left. Watching this back, I'm as confused as you are. Anyway, we can pull from the same train and start setting up the deep core crystals. They're a little more complex than they seem, because on the surface they're just calcium and powder, but they also take deep solution, which is another cube product. Not only that, but it spits out this gross byproduct I'll need to deal with. The deep solution is made in ultra-dense furnaces and takes tons of powder and sulfuric acid. The powder I can just pull in from nearby and load using loaders, but the sulfuric acid is probably worth setting up a train for. The mineral water is pretty much useless and only useful for making refined concrete. And my only real complaint about this mod is that you only unlock refined concrete towards the end of it, so I never ended up using it in decorating my base. Also, with the resplendent plates, I've unlocked super long-handed inserters. What'll they think up next? And after so much over-preparing earlier and setting up tons of trends I'll never use, the only thing I didn't set up was the one I'd actually need. At least with requester chests, I can finally fuel these things automatically. Yeah, up until now I've just been filling every train by hand. With the sulfuric acid over here, all that's left to do is add this stop to the cube's schedule, and we've got our deep solution. And there's our deep crystals. That's everything for the deep introspection card. And now I can actually show you the lab setup I forgot to record when I first built it. So, now what? There's no new science in the tech tree, just this forbidden ziggurat. That's foreboding, but to even make it I'll need singularity and quantum calibration data, whatever those are. But before messing with that, I've got to actually deal with the mineral water. If I put it inside of a distillery along with some more sulfuric acid, I can turn that into deep solution, which is definitely something that I'll want to do because it would massively ease off of my power demand, as well as making it so that we'll need the cube less often. It also takes sand, but I'll just take that from the stone output of the forges nearby. There's also a way worse way to get rid of it that just recovers some powder that I've set up as a backup, but throughout the whole rest of this game, these chemical plants completed that recipe 80 times, so it's hardly worth the effort. Also, here's something I've just realized. The coal output of the deep core crushing is way beyond what the tar can consume. Don't get me wrong, we're using tons of that stuff for making tar, but it's just that we're making even more than that. There's a recipe that I should have set up that turns coal and steam into refined tar directly, but at this point it would have been really difficult to fit into my base, and I really don't want to bother, so I'm just going to store all of that excess into a bunch of boxes. I've been doing tons of tweaks and optimizations to the factory here and there, and I've also decided that after 50 hours I'd finally like to have exoskeletons. I couldn't make them earlier because they take speed modules, which require deep core powder. So after tons of effort, I put together this equipment. It's still only power armor because I have no idea where power armor Mark II actually is, presumably behind the forbidden ziggurat. Then there's this mystery furnace. It burns haunted energy cells and you can put pretty much anything into it. Putting most items into it, it seems to break them down into their constituent ingredients, while spitting out some residual tendrils. It seems to be a way to void most items, but as a potential solution to the coal crisis, the haunted energy cell cost is way too much. Then just for funsies, I throw my old armor into it and get power armor? Well, what if I put power armor into it? Power armor Mark II, okay, so much for all that effort making it myself. Well, what if I put power armor Mark II into it? A single potato. Alright, fair enough. As much as I'd love to sit around and optimize my base all day, I've got to gather the ingredients for the ziggurat. One of them is arcane drive units, and they're not used in any science, so I don't need to worry about mass producing them. They take phantom cubes, so I'll just build it over here so that they can leech off of the phantom cube zone. All the other ingredients can come in by logistics bots, and I'll just set up some quick circuitry to make it so that it only uses the cube for a little while before putting it back. Wouldn't want the cube to be delayed by this. Now those will slowly accumulate while I start worrying about the other items. The quantum calibration data can only come from quantum decoding. In order to do that, I'll first need to set up these qubit shells. They take crystals, consciousness, spectrolite, and sophisticated matter. As you might suspect, the shells themselves are just the start, and I absolutely love these super long-handed inserters. Also, they spit out empty Besselheims, and the only place that gets rid of them is on the other side of the Earth. But I'm feeling lazy today, so I just throw them onto the same belt that handles the tendrils from the data cards, then set up this filter splitter. Seeing as the tendril belt is always moving, there's no real danger, and if it does stop moving, that means power is clogged, and I think I've got slightly bigger concerns than a few glass bottles. Okay, so then I've got to turn those shells into qubits in these particle phase aligners. There's 6 different types: up, down, strange, charm, top, and bottom. Making an up qubit is as simple as throwing an empty shell into the phase aligner, but to make a down qubit, it requires an up qubit, and strange requires a down qubit, and so on and so forth. Seeing as we'll need all of these in equal amounts, that means the setup will need to look something like this. I was a little torn on how to set up the belts for all 6, as in whether I should combine them into 3 two-sided belts or keep them as 6 individual ones. The reason is because getting quantum data isn't as simple as putting a thing in a thing. Only one combination of 2 will result in data, and all the others will spit out garbage. The problem? The correct combination changes every time you get it right, and it's totally random. That's right, there's 21 different combinations and no way of knowing which one is the correct one. Naturally, that just means we need to attempt every single combination until we get the right one, but what does that look like in Factorio terms? Well, buckle up because I'll show you. Conceptually, it's simple. We just need something that goes through a sequence of 21 possibilities continuously until it succeeds. And we'll know based on what it spits out. If it outputs a shell, that means we failed and we need to advance to the next in the sequence, and if it outputs data, we can reset the sequence. Once again, we've got a memory cell. Only this time, every time the inserter that's set up to only pick up shells grabs something, it'll add one to the memory cell, while the other one sends the reset signal. We only want to insert 2 specific qubits on each step of the sequence, so we'll control each inserter with its own unique signal. However, 2 of the same color is a valid input, which complicates things, and yet the answer is simple. I can use the same signal that enables the inserters to also control the stack size, so if I send it a value of 1 blue, it'll only pick up 1, but a value of 2 will cause it to pick up both at once. Now, actually programming the sequence is quite straightforward. All we'll need is a bunch of constant combinators feeding into decider combinators that will act as gates. The CCs will be programmed with 1 combination, 1 blue, 1 yellow for example, and that will feed into the DC. The DC will only allow the data inside the CC through when the value inside the memory cell equals a preset value, 1, 2, so on and so forth until 21. That data will then go into a clock that pulses that data into the inserters every 3.2 seconds or so to ensure that it only inserts the combination once every cycle of the machine. And just like magic, the whole thing works. There's our quantum calibration data, but let's just stand here and appreciate this thing a little more. Let me just clean out this coal real quick. Alright, there's one thing left, but before that, I'll want to set up some uranium mining. I've mostly eschewed uranium in favor of man-made horrors beyond your comprehension, but uranium will be useful here. There is technically a way to make the singularity analysis data without uranium, but it takes twice the metals and 10 times the time, so it's definitely a significant upgrade. It's the same as usual, you mine uranium with sulfuric acid and throw it all into a centrifuge, except this time there's the extremely rare uranium-234, which is useless for us, so who cares. All we want is the basic 238, so everyone else goes into boxes to be forgotten about. We barely need any of it to begin with, and I'm also lazy, so I'm just going to let logistics bots fly all the way out here to pick it up and bring it back to the base. The singularity analysis isn't as weird as the quantum calibration, but it's not so simple either. In order to make it, I'll need boson conduits and fermion conduits, which are made in these special cyclotrons. The recipe itself takes powder and solution, as well as ectoplasm, which is a little annoying because I use that to power my base, but the hook is that it only has a 50% chance to make 50 of either one. You can make 50 of both, or neither if you're unlucky. The complications arise when you realize that it takes 60% more boson conduits than fermion to make the data, so assuming an even ratio, you'll always need more boson. However, there's a recipe to turn fermion into boson conduits. It just takes the cube and some more crystals. All I've got to do is set up some simple circuitry that detects an imbalance in the conduits and expels any excess to be converted, while also having a way to call the cube when there's enough waiting for conversion. And why use many machines when I can just use one? Is what I was thinking when I set up another memory cell similar to the core mining, but guess what? Apparently I can't read, because if I could, I'd realize that cyclotrons are unique and that they can only be used once every 80 seconds, due to relying on an internal capacitor that needs to be charged to 240 megajoules first. So this thing is entirely worthless, and I can only convert 50 at a time. Whatever, I'll wait to see if it's actually that bad, but now to make the rest. It's done in another folding engine, and on top of taking tons of metals, it's also one of the weirdest recipes in the game, because it takes the dormant cube as input and spits out the active cube. I'm going to want to do this multiple times, so that means multiple passes into the boiler. The steam is mostly a waste product, but I can just burn it all in the turbines and get some free power out of it. Getting it into the boiler was a bit annoying, but that's nothing some atrocious inserter chains can't fix. So that works. Probably the worst thing I've built in this base thus far, but it's at least functional. And see what I mean about the cyclotrons? Well, we've got everything we need for the ziggurat, and if those two cards are any indication, I am terrified of the final challenge. After researching the ziggurat, it tells me I'll need to build it first before I can see what it's for, so I guess I'll do just that. It takes quite a bit, and after picking up all the cards, plates, and energy cells, it's time for the arcane drive units. Now to actually build this thing, but while I'm doing that, might as well enjoy the view. Placing the ziggurat allows us to research the Helvetica scenario. It also reveals the final research card, and well, it's worthy of being the final challenge, I'll tell you that. But first I've got to add some finishing touches to the base. I considered adding beacons, and they're interesting because they take beacon juice to run, but they can't use efficiency modules, and the power cost is the main reason I've been avoiding using tons of modules in the first place, so I think I'll pass. Also, remember calcium? Well, the problem's never been solved, just delayed, so I finally got to address it. Even with all these recipes that take calcium, we still make more than we use, and instead of starting to pave the entire planet, the only way to deal with it is to use the alternative metals recipe. Also, it's good to set this up because despite starting at 5.5 million ores, my main patch is down to like 800k now, so setting up another mine is good. Trains are also way too much effort when it's this close by, and belts come cheap, so belts it is. The other recipe requires no crushers, and will turn 6,000 ore into 2,000 metals at once, provided you've got the explosives to facilitate it. This recipe is superior because it makes twice as much metal in the same amount of time as the first one, is straightforward, requiring only raw ores, and needs much less space. Unfortunately, you can't use it much, because you need calcium for all but the first two sciences. Oh yeah, and here's me finally getting the hang of the power switch. Fortunately, the power switch doesn't care that we're opening and closing a high voltage line 60 times a second, and so I can just read if there's metals on the input line to know to turn them on. I do wish I incorporated this design elsewhere. Anyway, it varies, but it seems like you make anywhere between 25 to 50% more calcium than you can actually consume in the later game, and to balance it out, you've got to use this recipe. But only when you've got too much calcium, so I'll just hook it up to the line with priority input splitters and disable the stop unless there's plenty of calcium in storage. Alright, and I'm not sure if you noticed, but the ziggurat has an energy demand of 4 gigawatts, and activating the Helvetica scenario takes 16 seconds. That is a lot of power, and even after reducing it by 80% with modules, it's still a lot of power. And that's why I'm putting up 1 million of these energy banks. Each one of these has as much capacity as 100 accumulators, and I just want to say how cool it is that storing energy like this is actually useful. Ultracube's got a lot of cool quirks that force you to reevaluate how you approach the game. 100 gigajoules of capacity should be more than enough. Time to get into it. This thing consumes 50 megawatts just idling, so I'll want to keep it isolated from the power grid when it's not in use. But the Helvetica scenario, basically we're going to annihilate our cube in order to create antimatter. Horrifying, I know, but that's not nearly as horrifying as what we've got to do after that. We've got to put the cube back together. First, we need to crush ultra-dense debris to make ultra-dense particulate, then we need to make ultra-dense concentrate, and then ultra-dense sap. And then we put everything back together to make ultra-dense matter units, and finally ultra-dense composite. Did you get all that? Well, it's even more complicated than it sounds, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't sound simple. First off, you only get 256 pieces of debris, and that's all you'll ever get. The goal is the composite, but to make it you need a carefully planned out ratio of every component. The sap actually spits out enough debris to cover its concentrate costs, so you can cycle infinite amounts of sap by crushing it and turning it back into concentrate. That's the easiest part. It's everything else that's tough, because our cube is broken. We can't do anything until we fix it, and there's the problem. This is probably the only mod where it's possible to soft lock yourself at the end of the game, because if we run out of supplies before we can put it back together, we'll never be able to make the items necessary to actually reassemble it. One cube takes 64 composite, takes 512 matter units, which takes 1,280 sap, 768 concentrate, and 1,024 particulate. The ratio is paramount. Fortunately, if we accidentally make too much concentrate, we can turn it back into dust by making sap, but it seems best to just ratio it out beforehand. I've got everything set up, so here we go. Forgive me, Cube, I have to do this. I love how it creates a single legendary iron gear wheel. It's like I'm really playing the expansion early. But anyway, I've got these boxes that hold on to the particulate until it sets aside 1,024, then it lets the rest through to be turned into concentrate. That concentrate is cycled through until there's enough sap to make all the matter units, and then the sap is cut off and everything is sent to the furnaces before being turned into composite and then eventually the cube. It seems to be working, until... oh man, it takes mineral water, but I didn't realize it needed so much. I'm almost completely out. I've got a little left in the tanks, but I need to go as far as changing the recipes in the distilleries to try and make them spit out their mineral water. I'm also picking up some deep core crystals to wring out as much as possible. Well, that's one example of how you can accidentally soft lock, and it seems to be working. And then it hits me. I have no idea how I got this far before realizing this, but we need to use every single piece of the broken cube. There is no margin for error. And you want to know what I forgot to consider? The fact that the machines can end up carrying one piece of dust and hold on to that until the end of time with no way of ever completing the recipe. So now I've got to painstakingly go through every machine looking for the missing pieces and put it together myself. Thankfully I managed to put the cube back together, but it's just dawning on me that I'm gonna need to completely rebuild this thing. So here I go deleting everything. I'll keep the method of separating the 1024 particulate we'll need, but everything else needs to be carefully portioned. One solution would be to only use one machine of each, but that would be incredibly slow, so I need more machines, but also some way of only putting items into the machine when there's exactly enough to make that item so nothing gets stuck inside. Well, instead of inserting directly into the machine, I can first put it into a chest. Then the inserter that feeds into the machine can be set to have a hand size of 4 and to only activate when there's exactly 4 in the chest. Okay, that'll work, but then the problem becomes how to get exactly 4 into the chest. Well, I can use a constant combinator to output a signal with the value of 4. I can hook that up to another stack inserter and use it to control the hand size. This means it will only pick up 4 at a time, but it needs to be dynamic. What if it only picked up 1 because the belt was almost empty? For that, I can read the contents of the box into an arithmetic combinator that multiplies it by -1. Anything in the box will become negative, and if I combine that with the output of the constant combinator, it means it'll subtract from that value. Since it's also our hand size control, that means if there's 1 item in the chest, the hand size will become 4 minus 1, aka 3, and it'll only try to pick up 3 items at a time. Then if there's 4 in the chest, the hand size will be 0 and won't be able to pick up anything until it's all been used by the machine. Alright, now I just need to redo everything with this technology in mind and change the values appropriately for each recipe. Okay, now it's ready for another go. But moving the legendary gear with logistics bots felt so underwhelming, so let's build this teleporter whose only purpose is to move it 15 meters to the left. Now that's the kind of entrance the cube deserves. It's working! It's working! It's not working! So my design stops singular items from getting stuck inside the machines, but they can still get stuck inside the chests. Admittedly, it's way better than last time, but it's still completely inoperable. The only thing I can do at this point is just add another inserter that periodically tries to empty out the chests and places them onto a belt that cycles it back into the start. At this point, I should really just abandon this design, but if I did that, that would mean that the last 4 hours I've spent on this were meaningless, and I don't want that. I am committed to this awful design. Here we go. I didn't even have time to mention all the other random ingredients this stuff took. Rest assured, after the hiccup with the mineral water, I've ensured that every ingredient has an ample supply for the cube. Well, it's not working now because it gets stuck when there's only a few items left and they become spaced out such that the inserter can never pick them all up at once, so some slips by and they end up eternally getting stuck. I can kind of mitigate it by adding faster and slower belts at strategic points, and it's hilarious how having access to only red belts is actively a detriment here, but it works most of the time. And while I can think of a way to fix it completely, I'm tired. I am declaring it good enough. There we go, Cube is reformed and all is right in the world. The best part is, in the upcoming Factorio expansion, you'll be able to read the contents of assemblers directly, so all of this nonsense wouldn't have even been necessary. At least this recipe makes 1,000 cards worth of antimatter at a time, so it won't need to be done very often. Did you know that we're only one research away from beating the game? Here it is, the answer to life, the universe, and everything. It takes 2 minutes per card and requires a whopping 9,600 of each card to finish. Trust me, in Ultracube this is a lot. Even if I met my goal of 60 SPM perfectly, it'll still take me a minimum of 3 hours to finish. Because the research itself takes so long, I'll need a couple more labs to actually consume everything fast enough. And it's time to clean out the coal again. Learn from my example and actually set it up properly. Tar is a major resource, and saving some cube time would have been very useful right now. And I've finally run out of that one stone mine I set up a million years ago, so I've got to set up another one, but that's about it. All that's left to do is wait, really. As usual, the cracks only appear when you start running the factory at full blast for the first time. That being said, it's actually working better than I anticipated. The biggest shortcoming is definitely the metals. I should have made more than 12 furnaces, but it's difficult to know these things the first time through. The good thing about the furnaces is because they burn the cube as fuel, you can fill them with as many speed modules as you want without any additional energy cost. Thinking back on it, I probably should have set up beacons just for this, but you need to speed up the crushers as well. Though while it's easy to identify metal shortages, it wouldn't be an issue if the other processes were fast enough to compensate. The Phantom Cube products take quite a long time, and while I don't think my design is bad, it could definitely afford to be improved. That's the interesting thing about this mod, because looking back at all this with the power of hindsight, I can think of a million ways to improve everything. My Singularity data is barely functional and would really benefit from being rebuilt. It's a mod that seems to beg you to play it twice. And then out of nowhere, my power dies. Turns out it was because making science for so long massively increased the demand on explosives, which were set up in such a way that they could grab almost all the sulfur before it could be turned into acid. That stopped batteries from being made, and that stopped haunted energy cells from being made, which killed all of my power. Let me tell you, I am so glad I learned my lesson the first time and set aside these spare haunted cells for just such an emergency. The massive 100 gigajoule power banks actually sustained the base for so long that the premonition cards were able to consume all of the spare haunted cells on the belt. Well, with that resolved, we're in the final stretch. My final SPM was a little under 60, and the final research took me about 4 hours, but all things considered, I'm reasonably pleased with how my base turned out. And now we can learn the truth that we've been fighting for this entire time. The answer is...
Cube.
Of course, it's so simple. Also, cube utilization 31.38%. I can't believe the mod created a new metric just to shame my awful designs. But anyway, the answer was cube, of course. How could I be so blind? It was right there in front of me the entire time. I didn't need any of this stuff. All I've ever needed was the cube. All of this, everything, it's meaningless as long as I've got my cube. Get out of my sight, disgusting automatons! The Cube and I would like to thank you for watching, and a very special thanks from the Cube goes out to all of my patrons for generously funding these videos. These videos take quite a long time to make, and it's always heartening to know that I don't need to worry about chasing trends and rushing videos out every week. Ultracube was an experience. It took me 68 hours, but honestly it felt closer to 100 with all the design anxiety. And with that being said, it's probably the most unique overhaul out there. It manages to completely change the dynamic without altering the fundamentals, and most importantly, it's got a cube. Haha, yes, the cube is unstoppable. Never mind.